And I think with that, we're 5 minutes after the hour, so we should just jump in. And just in the spirit, because I think it's fun for the oral tradition, I picked out a passage to read to kick us off, get in the mood, as it were, and then we can jump in. Of course, I went to the wrong page, so give me just a second. Okay, this is a slightly longer one than I normally do, but short enough. So he had tricked them all. After examining the mighty bow carefully, inch by inch, as easily as an experienced musician stretches a sheep gut string around a lyre's peg and makes it fast, Odysseus with ease strung the great bow. He held it in his right hand and plucked the string, which sang like swallow song, a clear, sweet note. The suitors, horrified, grew pale, and Zeus made ominous thunder rumble. Odysseus, who had so long been waiting, was glad to hear the signal from the son of double-dealing Cronus. He took up an arrow which was lying on the table. The others were all packed up in the quiver, soon to be used. He laid it on the bridge, then pulled the notch end and the string together, still sitting in his chair. With careful aim he shot. The weighted tip of bronze flew through each axe head and then out the other side. And I just love that because there's like so many different things that I feel like that passage encapsulates. It's like it's the action, it's the tension, it's like the release of what's about to happen. There's references to Zeus and Cronus and Greek mythology that like, he doesn't take the time to explain to you because he assumes you already know it. If you're Greek, that you know all these stories. And so I just think it like set the stage for this one. But Trey, you got your hand raised. Jump in.
Yeah, and I hope it didn't cut out and I somehow missed it, but I thought you stopped before the last line where it says he told his son.
I did.
Uh, okay. Were you going to comment on that?
Oh, the reason I
Because
the
if
reason I
not,
stopped the reason I stopped
okay,
there is
go
because
ahead.
it kind of. Oh, go ahead, Trey.
Or no, you go ahead. Like, why'd you stop there?
I stopped there because, and then out the other side is like the action is he's like revealed to everyone in the thing, and then when he turns to his son Telemachus, he is it's kind of like transitioning out of the climax. Like you hit the climax, he shoots through the bow, and then like a different set of action starts. So I could have finished that, but it's not clear for me that he told his son, and the next part is as relevant to the full piece. It's just like it's the action scene of him shooting the bow that I was trying to capture. But do you have something you want to say about the he told his son and the relevance?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and confess. I had to listen to this I had to listen and not read, and even worse, at a pretty high speed that became higher and higher. I don't know, it started out crazy high. However, I still caught this. Oh, wait, take that back. I was listening and reading, doing the follow along thing. But I was still able to flip through this passage exactly to it in the book because it jumped out at me when I heard it. But the other thing that jumped out about the whole reading and the book in general, and I hope this doesn't get too far ahead, but I remember it started with some father-son dynamic or something. Sorry, it's been a while. And I'm like, it kind of ends with that too. And, and to me, it's like, wait a second, I thought this was about the whole story was about some massive voyage and, all this other stuff. Uh, but it's a father-son tale, arguably. And so for that reason, when the line, everything you said is totally correct, and I'm glad I asked, but that he told his son part, I would argue that it like this passage is again one that jumped out at me, and then he told his son just wraps up the whole book. If that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, this is I think part of the thing is like there's multiple threads coming to a close, right? This is literally the end of the book that we've been, spending. Well, this is seven, so we've been 7 months at this, I think, from when we started. And so, 6, 7 months of reading this book, there's the Telemachus coming of age story that's kind of resolving. There's the Penelope story. There's what's actually happens to the suitors. There's the end of his voyages. There's the actual recognition and kind of identity in his, ending of his Nostos and actually being home. So a great point to just pick up on of like that the Telemachus piece is certainly part of what we're resolving in these last four books. But so Trey kind of answered what would be my typical starting questions, like what jumped out. So to Trey, to me, what jumps out is this like bow scene because I think it's so climactic. It's like it's just like true reveal in this broader sense, not fully revealed to everyone yet. Of course, we still have to have the olive tree bedpost discussion with Penelope. But at this point, Odysseus has revealed himself to the suitors. He's kind of back in his household, and we'll get into a lot of like significance of the bow itself. There's a lot of things in the story that the bow's representing and tying together. Trey mentioned kind of Telemachus. What else jumped out to other people? Telemachus, bow, or otherwise?
I'll say one that jumped out to me, maybe not like super important to the story, but I just laughed so hard, is when Odysseus in the disguise says like, "Oh, well, let me try and string the bow and I'll shoot it through." And they go, "No, no, 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 because if you do, then we'll be embarrassed. We can't let you do that." I laughed so hard.
Yeah, they're not. It's like they're not actually that worried that he's gonna do it and reveal himself as Odysseus. They're just like, well, we don't want to be embarrassed by some poor beggar coming in and
Yeah.
one-upping us after we couldn't do it. Julie, did you come up mute?
I find myself trying to understand the mystery of this book and its hold on not just our culture, but like I mean, how long has this been, one of the central pieces of classical literature? And like, what is it that draws so many people over so long to this? And am I like I think a lot of it's great and it's a little mysterious to me. Like I'm sure it's worth rereading several times, but I feel like I'm not following something. Am I too modern? Again, I think a lot of it's great. I'm so glad that I'm finally reading it, but it's mysterious to me. And I mean, I have a lot of questions. Is it is it more relatable for men than women?
Mhm.
Yeah, so I'd love some discussion on that at some point.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And as a reminder, we have this session is going to be these four books, but we have another session that I scheduled purposefully after the Christopher Nolan movie comes out. And the some of the things I was definitely hoping to get into is like, well, what did you think? Now that you read the whole thing, what do you think place in culture? Where would jumping off point to, what books next or what things kind of the broad takeaways of the whole story. Not that we can't touch on some of that tonight, Julie. But we do have that coming and had the recap explicitly at the end because like I kind of want to tease exactly that out of like what do people think and where does it come from? But I do think the last four books in particular can leave your head spinning a bit. What did folks think of the last four? Did it feel abrupt? Did it feel like it wrapped up nicely? Did it, how did you kind of feel about the ending as a whole, as it were, these four books? Did it deliver on what you expected?
I
Um,
think yeah.
go ahead.
No, this is just leaves more wanting, you just feel like, huh? You turn the page and then you get to the references. And yeah, I thought it was, yeah, you can have a sequel here that we easily could meet this. I haven't read the Iliad, so I don't know, how would that connect to this one, but anyway, I had the feeling that I want more.
Yeah, not an uncommon feeling at all. Paul and then Marcus.
Um, yeah, I was really struck after after they do the killing. Penelope's kind of caution was, I thought, an interesting thread. Uh, was a little annoyed. Telemachus is still kind of chastising her, even after this has all happened. Um, but the part where she, she's kind of like tested him and been wary, and then book 23 around 210. Do not be angry at me now, Odysseus. In every other way, you are a very understanding man. The gods have made us suffer. They refuse to let us stay together and enjoy our youth until we reach the edge of age together. A little bit more. I felt a constant dread that some bad man would fool me with his lies. There are so many dishonest, clever men. The foreigner would never have gotten Helen into bed if she had known the Greeks would march to war and bring her home again. It was a goddess who made her do it. Just like really bringing the weight of the 20 years or whatever it's been, and it's so um, uh, you kind of somewhat of a catharsis, but also it's kind of bittersweet, right? Because they've lost all this time together, and then also just kind of she ties it to the whole Trojan War, and this is a whole world that's been kind of racked by uh, a decade of everybody who didn't come home and was away for so long, and the people who were back home who were suffering because the men were all off fighting and dying, and then some of them getting lost on their way back for a long time. So
Thanks, Paul. Marcus, you want to add to that?
Um, I was gonna add to Selena's point on the sequel uh idea because I think they do like sort of set that up with like sets up something he has to go do to placate Poseidon. And then even then like the final scene even has like a fade to black sort of like feel to it while they're like on the battlefield. But definitely something I want to bring up in the next session is like Iliad and Odyssey, I think are part of like a bigger canon. And like we just don't have the other books of like some of these stories. So like trying to piece in like what was common to the Greeks at the time and like how all these other stories might have related into that as well, I think would be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a book called or an epic poem called the Telagony, or Telagony, I think is how you say it, about Telegonus, the son of Odysseus by Circe. And
Mm.
there's a there's lots of lost things, but references to it that kind of ends with him coming back and killing his father, and Odysseus going out to find the place of the winnowing fan, which we can come back to as well. But I want to let John jump in here.
Thanks. Well, what struck me, I think that I'm going to attempt to speak to Julie's question, maybe indirectly, but um, what struck me is how non-supernatural the resolution is to the story. We get like one thunderbolt from Zeus at the end, but for the most part, like the story, like although it's set up as this like incredibly big divine drama, it resolves with like a fundamentally human encounter between Odysseus and his enemies and his reunion with his family. And that is treated by the authors, I suppose, as a like a suitable ending, like a satisfying um, enough, conclusion. And this will sound strange perhaps, but it got me thinking about the difference between Achilles and Odysseus. Because Achilles is almost entirely divine, but has a little bit of human mortality in the Achilles heel. And so this is what allows him to die and to become tragic. And they celebrate Achilles, who's mostly divine and a little bit human. And then we get a progression to Odysseus, who they celebrate, who is entirely human and not divine at all. And he would also be distinct from other figures like Hercules, who, like Hercules, is basically gaining supernatural powers throughout his story, and then in the end ascends to Mount Olympus to join the gods. So what strikes me about the Odysseus story is that it's a completely human story. And to me, it's what's significant about it is the Greeks starting to celebrate human existence on its own terms, celebrate mortals on their own terms, without needing to have some, kind of flashy divine ascension at the end. It's just him coming back home to be with his family is the reward, and like nothing else needs to be added to that.
Yeah,
So,
I really like your hearing your perspective and just how your mind is thinking
Yeah.
about that, John. It's really rich
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
on that large scale. The way you kind of described it, of like the gods have the main influence, and then like things are turning or changing, and where like the human is appreciating and this the
Yeah, and I really didn't know what to expect going in, so it just, yeah, to me, this seems like the story is on the path to a kind of Greek humanism.
Mm.
Um, and the Odyssey, like the word, has this kind of psychedelic connotation, and like certainly a lot of crazy stuff happens in the story, but to me, it's actually, um, yeah, a story about mortals, and about like celebrating a human who just struggles really hard and succeeds.
yeah, I
And
think
I mean, he had help. I mean, like, look how much help. I'm not disagreeing with you, but like Athena was in there with the slaughter, just so much. And then Athena was in at the very end when all of Ithaca was up in arms, and so like maybe the gods, the role of the gods or the supernatural is, like maybe they're learning to 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 be more subtle or something like that about their interventions with us.
Yeah, I think it can be both, right? I think there's some level of that there are the fates that are dealt by the gods a little bit, and these big things that humans can't control. But Odysseus is very much set up differently than many of the characters in the Iliad, including himself, where it's not about being a great warrior or really having like Achilles to John's point, mostly divine. He really is celebrating this book for his wit, for his cunning, for his skill. I mean, even stringing the bow, they make a big point about how he does it so easily and how he's so skilled at kind of manipulating it. He's not just the biggest and strongest of all the men there, and therefore he's able to do this. He's able to do it for other reasons that are very human and kind of setting up. And you do see this in kind of the Greek myths and the stories of things that revolve all around Zeus and Mount Olympus and the gods there, and transitioning to more and more human-centric stories before the gods kind of back out of the story a little bit more, and humans take a center stage. And that partly my favorite part of Stephen Fry's book, Odyssey, that kind of goes through all the stuff that I had mentioned in a pass along, is he tells some of the stories that come after where the gods really start stepping out, and there's a creation of like, a judicial system and humans judging, not gods judging. And so it's like this evolution of the story of the civilization. Homer's very much telling a story about society and humans and civilization and people and what is to be celebrated and what is not to be celebrated, of course, or what is to be feared, or fought back against, if you will. In the suitors not practicing Xenia being an example. So John, I think you're totally right that there's a very, very human element to this, which is frankly part of the reason I like it so much, is it weaves the two together. It feels very magical at times, and still very human.
Mhm.
Anything else on that? That seems like a rich vein. Does anybody else have anything they want to add on that? Well, then I will say one of the things that I laughed at to Marcus had a place where he chuckled. I chuckled at the part where it says the six men threw their spears as he had said. At once Athena made their efforts fail. One pierced the doorpost of the palace hall, another hit the closely fitted door, another spear of ash and heavy bronze fell in the wall. The group of four avoided all of the suitors' spears. And I was like, well, this is just like straight out of a Marvel movie. It's like any good superhero movie, you're like, how does James Bond not get shot? Like all these guys are firing machine guns. You tell me not a single bullet, finds him. So there's this like divine peace, that Athena's involved, but it doesn't feel like too much intervention, if you will. It's like, well, like, we kind of expected them to miss anyway, and Odysseus is good. But Brent, you came off mute of that.
I just laughed because you like threw up his rags right before that, and he jumps up like bare ass naked on the table with the bow. And I imagine that in the upcoming, Marvel movie. And I'm like, that's going to be a great Matt Damon scene.
But what is interesting is, there are, I think, six men that throw their spears and they all fail. And then there's a second set that same thing happened. The description is exactly the same. The arrows go here and there and there. So that is very interesting. I agree with you. I had the same thought about, oh, that is action movie. Yeah.
And yeah, it is funny too, because this all was inspired in part by like what's the big deal about the Odyssey? Like, why is this going to be a Christopher Nolan movie? Why are they returning this? To get to Julie's point, these four books in particular, I was like, I wonder how Nolan's going to depict this. Like there's so much in it. We're like, oh, I'm so curious what they do. And there's that scene in here where Odysseus kind of turns handsome and his hair gets curly again, and he like looks great. And then there's that, was it Saving Private Ryan, where there's that Matt Damon scene where he looks young and changes to old, and I'm just like, I hope there's almost like a shot for shot, but he goes from Matt Damon as he is like 40 to this curly haired god of a man style thing, because it just seemed like, oh, Christopher Nolan should have a field day with that. But Brendan came up.
I'm curious to know how he'll handle the brutality. Because like Odysseus is like by today's cultural standards, not that sympathetic of a character when he's like cutting up a guy and torturing him before he's allowed to die because he like handed the wrong guys the bow and arrow, and he's like killing all the women. Like, I'm very curious how he chooses to depict that for a modern audience.
Mhm.
Yeah, this line was more probably Tarantino of torture him with hours of agony before he dies after they.
They
Yeah,
need to,
Telemachus like hangs all those women, like, and it like talks about them all like hanging one by one, and you're like, that could be a hell of a scene.
Yeah, in
I
fact,
was,
The Guardian had an article about that, how they're going to show that scene. I'm sorry, Sue.
no. I was thinking about Julie's comment too about the brutality of it and if it's more appropriate for men versus women. My kids always know mom doesn't like violence kind of movies kind of thing. So I literally had similar thoughts through those things like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be doing this that part of that movie, and just how brutal it was. And it's just so brutal and so much of that you think about the times and there's so many different brutal things that happened throughout without just this final scene and the slaves and the this and the that, just a very brutal time. And so I again thought the same thing. It's like, what will they do? How will it be? How interesting this is.
Oh, I think that's an interesting point you mentioned about like how brutal the times were. I mean, what do you think? I mean, would this be shocking to the people of the day, or is this like kind of par for the course?
Yeah.
It makes me think it's par for the course. I mean, with the whole idea of like the hanging and the, um who, kept their word for me over those 20 years, and if not, I'm killing them and just taking them out. And I mean, I don't know how you could that could not be, well, I assume it would be part of the day. Uh, but I don't know.
Julie, did you want to add something?
Yeah, yeah, but I think it would also be brutal because like they thought the Ithacans when they found out that all these suitors who were, I'm guessing, were big men on campus in Ithaca, that they were all killed, like that Odysseus and his family expected an outrage,
Right.
were preparing themselves, that they were that for the onslaught. And
I was surprised by that. I guess
It's
I just kept thinking, all this brutal, 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 like what now somebody's gonna care? I mean, I just was surprised.
I was
Marcus?
gonna say it seems to me that like in the last 100 years we've had in some of our warfare like way more brutal, way more torturous like things happen between humans than some of the scenes in this. But it's so like dispersonal, right? It's like people who are on the other side of the world that we don't know anything about. I think what stands out on the brutality of this is like I don't know, it's like very personal. Like we get all these people's names, like we get some of their lineages. These are the people who are like living in his house. So like um, it's more of this brutality of like the disloyalty of the people who were close to him rather than like the brutality of like a war or something where you can sort of wave off like, oh, these are just foreigners or barbarians or
Or
something.
we have to or something.
Yeah.
I think the brutality is also, like it's even one step removed now with drones doing the killing, but it's like, here's one person killing another person, that's, 5 feet, 10 feet from them. And that, that is so visceral and personal and, you know, responsible. You are responsible for the death of, quote unquote.
Mhm.
There isn't these things to hide behind that you're shooting at people, 300
I,
feet.
John?
I think one of the paradoxes that's presented to the modern reader is the question of whether there's such a thing as divinely inspired rage. Um, to us, that seems, incoherent. But to them, I suspect it seemed more natural. And today many people still speak of anger as righteous, as a precious feeling that helps set your moral compass. And we expect, anger to ultimately get channeled into a well-designed justice system. But I think part of what you're seeing in the Odyssey is that energy fully embodied, fully actualized, fully played out on Earth with no institutional mediation. Um, and so like that's kind of the first loop that like humans have to go through to like yeah make sense of these energies, I think. There was another thing I know we haven't talked too much about like comparative religion, and I don't want to like open a huge can of worms about that, but at least I was struck by a couple of parallels I thought to like the New Testament, and this idea of the Lord returning home unexpectedly is a theme that is in a lot of the Jesus parables, and the idea that your loyalty will be tested and you may think the Lord's never coming back, but it could happen at any hour, and so you need to be kind of faithful to the end. Um, that what seems like a parallel. And then another thing that really struck me is the specific line from Telemachus where I think it's the swineherd is like hesitating about whether to listen to the suitors or not, and Telemachus says like you cannot obey two masters. which is practically like a direct quotation from the New Testament. So, oh, and of course, this precedes, that by 500 years. So I did think there was some interesting parallels, and again, it's very blurry, but there's something like that where Odysseus represents, um, yeah, just like pure human anger on the one hand, but like divine justice at the same time. And it's just, I don't think the text really attempts to like sort that out cleanly, but like it's all there.
And I think that also relates to the element of character, and especially in these books, the the character of different people and different roles.
Say more about that, Julie.
Like there was the one scene when Odysseus took the two slaves outside and he said, what do you think? Like, let's say Odysseus came back, under the dark of night and was back. What would you think? Well, I can't remember his exact question, like would you say, oh, get out of here, you've been gone for years or whatever. And then they said, oh, praise, Zeus, make that happen, please. And just, like testing and just different people. This was a lot of testing in this whole story of people's choices and who did they stand with, and how did they act, even like the slave girls when like no one was watching, or would they sleep with the suitors, or would they be true to Penelope and things like
Yeah,
that.
so let's come back to testing because that's going to come up quite a few times, and with Penelope specifically. Um, on anyone have anything on the comparative religion piece for John?
Mm.
Not on comparative religion, but your relation to like modern justice systems, I think is actually huge. Right, because if I came home and there were squatters in my house, like calling the police, I'm getting a lawyer, like I'm gearing myself for like a lengthy like legal trial, like we've outsourced all of that. Like instant, like human justice, like like the authority of that determination rests in the one man rather than in the state. I think that is one of the big differences between um our society and the one that we see in the Odyssey.
Mhm.
Yeah, I tend to think about it as part of the reason I think religions overlap so much is somewhat basic, which is the human condition is pretty similar everywhere, and there are some basic rules that you put in place help prevent against the worst impulses of humans. And um, there's rules in every, religion about cleanliness because that really mattered, and there's your rules about how you treat others, and it kind of helps to have an elf on the shelf watching for good behavior. And I don't mean to belittle the religion, but I mean like in the sense of like comparing it to the Odyssey, there is a certain level like things could return, that he could come back, like your behavior is being watched, it's being judged, the gods are paying attention, like you need to be acting right, and let me show you what the consequences of not acting right are. And I think that there's to tie in to the conversations that are kind of happening around each other, there's the brutality and there's the question of justice, and there's the question that kind of of how will you be judged when someone returns. And so I'm curious, Amphimedon is the suitor who we had spoken about last month as being kind of like, I'm not sure we're doing the right thing here, guys. Like, I'm starting to feel kind of bad about this. I'm a little unsure. Like, maybe we should draw back. Maybe we should behave a little differently. And he he gets killed like all the rest, in this story. What do you think about the justice for him? Like, what is Homer saying about this character who it's somewhat ambiguous how he behaved, but he seems to be treated like all the rest.
It does seem to be that there's not a lot of patience for like changing your mind later, I guess. It's kind of like you've earned your outcomes by the actions that you took, and like there were years, it seems like, of his going along with, and so I think there's a subtle statement there of like, going along with the crowd and doing their thing is just as bad. And I think is he the one who begs forgiveness, Grant? There's one in particular who,
No, that's Eurytus.
yeah, and who's like, they made me do it. I don't give a shit, and kills him. Which, I mean, I think there's in other times in history, to again go back to the point of like, wartime atrocities, the they made me do it argument has also not found much sympathy from people.
Mhm. Mhm.
I also wonder if there's just something cultural in a way that we don't necessarily relate to, of just how that reaction places Odysseus in the role of just being very powerful. Like there, to the degree that he's not being celebrated as Achilles is for being the best warrior ever, that is still a value of that culture. And the thing that defines Odysseus is his wit, but there is clearly a sense of like, but he's also a great soldier. Like you can't, like, you kind of have to have both. You have to be at minimum very good at killing people to be valued in this. And it's interesting how much I think that relates to like the almost just the economy of the time and like what it means to be the king of an island. Like he's clearly not the king the way we think in like a feudal sense, where like your word is law because he had to go to war to defend himself against all the people he killed. It's more of a king in the sense of like he's the richest, and you get a sense very quickly of what it means to be the richest and how you become the richest, because he just got home, he won the battle, and he's like, fuck, now I gotta go rape and pillage. Like that's, like they took all my sheep, and so now I gotta go rob a bunch of other people. Like,
Get it
and that
back.
is just like that is what I'm supposed to do next. See, get ready for the sequel where I go just like kill a bunch of poor people who are like holding on to their cows. And so I think some of that brutality is just like, yeah, this guy's a badass, even if that wouldn't be
Mhm.
the implication for us.
Mhm.
Uh, Yeah, I totally agree. I think the power dynamic here is very interesting. What it means to be a good king, be a good ruler. There's a lot of the slaves, like how do you behave as a good slave? What are you supposed to do? And then like Penelope's position in all of this, right? Like what is her role and the power? And I read the Penelope ad in between this, and it kind of gets at that of like, what's the power dynamic? Like, how does she come to this? And Margaret Atwood sets her up as like a teenage girl who gets married off to, Odysseus, and doesn't have a lot of power in all of the story. And so I do think that's one of the things that I see more and more jump out in a lot of the reviews to modern readers is like the power imbalance in all of this, and the might still makes right in quite a bit of the story.
Yeah.
What do you think about the scene with the maids in particular? Like speaking of power dynamics, the maids who are hung.
To me, that's like
So
very Old Testament justice.
Selena?
no, I agree because essentially they had, slept with the suitors, they had betrayed, and I think they spoke back to Penelope, at least one of them who was more vocal. So there are all these disrespectful behavior and challenging, if you will, and that it really it just doesn't add to them. So they see the fate, and it's the separation. I mean, which ones, someone knew which ones were here, which ones were there, and what are the groups. So I thought it was very interesting. But I agree with Brandon. It's kind of yeah. No room for half measures.
No room for half measures is a great way to say it. Marcus?
Yeah, I think one thing on the maids that sort of stands out is like all the suitors, like when they're, when they're throwing the spears back and forth, like we get the names of the suitors, but I don't think we get the names of the maids, right? It's just these are the maids and now they're gone. And I've been listening to the Iliad since our last session as well, and that's one big thing that stands out to me, and that is like it's all like it's so Old Testament, like it's this guy, the son of this guy, the son of this guy from this town, and he was stabbed, and it names everyone, it gives their lineage. And it just really shows the importance of these people, right? And it's like the Greeks and the Trojans, right? They're naming everyone. And even in this, like the suitors are the bad guys, but they still get the name, right? They still get like the name in the story that's going to be passed down through history, right? We get that at the end with like Achilles. They say, um, Achilles, your name will be known for all of time. And well, that sort of came true, but the maids don't, you know, they're just gone.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's, the nobility versus the slaves thing, or if that's, the men versus women, or what the dynamic there is. But yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right on, John.
Yeah, I of course appreciate that this is sensitive and controversial, but I will take a stab at explaining the logic of hanging the maids, um, which is um, I think it's part of the theme of having a total reset in Ithaca. Like the idea is that like things have gone very wrong, and like the corruption has kind of become irredeemable. And so the return of Odysseus is about restoring order and purging basically evil that has gotten out of control. And so uh, there's kind of a metaphor there about the seed of evil living on in these potentially pregnant maids, and that you have to eliminate it because you need like a clean slate. Um, so that's my taking a stab at it.
I see Brennan nodding. You want anything, Brennan?
No, just that resonates. I think that is correct. I think we've talked before about how I've read much of this as that kind of like Jungian, you need the everybody in society in their right roles for society to function, and part of that is yeah, the casting out of evil, and I think that's exactly right.
And it's happening at a time when, you know, Telemachus goes out to deal with that and deal with the maids while Odysseus is in the house using sulfur and smoke and cleaning it out. Like the much of the scene, not just the maids, is revolved around like, no, we are fully cleansing the house. We're returning it to what it was. So John, I think very perceptive of like all tied together, those pieces. The cleansing that needs to happen to bring this back.
One thing, since John, you made that remark a bit ago about like this putting things in a bigger scale. One thing that's come to my mind, and also making correlations with religious possible connotations, that again, this could be controversial, but one of the big differences between the New Testament and the Old Testament is the idea of forgiveness. And like there was no forgiveness. Forgiveness was not a part of any of this. And just thinking about the bigger sweep of history, which it seems like that's part of what the Odyssey is about, and especially us reading it 2,000 years later, and just like are we perhaps developing as a species and as civilizations, and some of the big perhaps shifts, which of course we're failing at over and over and over. But just the difference between that is it's kind of like the whole thing seems like an Old Testament way in many regards.
Yeah, it's harsh, right? Like so much of this book is brutal and it speaks of the times, the slaves, all of it, and the the Old Testament lineage piece that Marcus brought up of, this person gets this person. The connection between all these people is, super important. And even like how they're tied to gods, how they're all related. Like, oh, many of these people all come from the same families. Like, but Penelope is a cousin of Helen, and the Phytus, who gives the bow to Odysseus, is the son of Eurytus, who was, the son of Apollo or the grandson of Apollo, I think. And, he's through Menelaus, related to Menelaus, who's obviously, married to Helen. Like all of the, like, it's a very small circle of families actually that govern most of the action. So, and the lineage becomes incredibly important over and over throughout the stories of who is the way, why are people the way they are? And almost all of them have some level of, well, because of their heritage. Going back to the point that someone made earlier about like Achilles, I think it was John, about like, mostly divine. His story and his lineage is very important to how, the part of him that's mortal. And the bow story, Eurytus, it's Eurytus's bow given to. I just thought this like scene was so interesting, and I was curious because it went into such description of the heritage of the bow, and jumped out to me of like why are they going through all this backstory on like where the bow came from. Um, in that Old Testament way. And Eurytus was considered like the greatest archer ever. And in one version of the story dies, or it has tragic results when he challenges Apollo, and says, he's as good as Apollo at shooting this arrow. So it's like this kind of like the bow comes from the best of all archers that there ever was, and the bow is given it through an act of Xenia, like through the gift, the guest relationship, where Odysseus gets the bow, he gives a sword, and I think a sword and a spear. I can't remember what the second one is, but it gives them, or a shield, gives them to Phytus, and doesn't take the bow with him to Troy, and so it's actually his like full return to this place. He's claiming his home in a way that he kind of hasn't yet by coming in. It's only his true identity can be revealed at that time. And oh, by the way, like this gift of Xenia is going to be what is the mechanism by which all the people who violated Xenia are murdered. So in this like 2-3 page, description of the bow, all of this lineage, all of this backstory, you're like, well, why is this here? And it's because it's setting up this bow is this like incredibly multifaceted symbol that's conveying all of this information to the reader of like what the significance is of like not only what's happening in the story, but what ties it to the kind of morality, to Brennan's point that Homer is presenting here about what makes a civilization function. So anyway, I just thought that piece was kind of fascinating how they like wove all the different pieces in. We haven't spoken. Oh, John, please. John, Marcus.
I think I have a similar point about, yeah, like there are certain, again, they're not super explicit, but yeah, I think there are pieces in the story that seem to be pointing towards the conditions that enable Odysseus's success. And so one of them is that he is in possession of this bow because of Xenia, for example. And I think just another simple point is like the cowherd and the swineherd are essential to his victory. So, like, again, it's not incredibly clear, but if we buy the premise that he's earned their loyalty, then like that's actually what enables him to defeat the suitors. Like if the swineherd and the cowherd betrayed him the same way that Melanthius did, then like there would be exits, there would be escapes, like, maybe the suitors could get more weapons. And so like having his like two slaves by his side, um, yeah, is like I guess another kind of credit that he's built up and like now he can spend it to achieve victory here.
John, on that, so it's a super interesting point that I hadn't thought of before about like what it speaks to Odysseus' credit. The part that I was curious about, or that I thought of, I'm curious what you make of what it's saying about like what the reader would take away about Eumaeus and the cowherd. What is it Homer conveying, and then them being on this side of the battle and the way that they behave? What would be your interpretation of what Homer is doing in telling their story that way?
Well, I mean, I think there's just the straightforward reading that like slaves should be loyal to their masters. Um, again, that's hard to translate, into language that would be compelling to us today. But um, yeah, I mean, I guess I mean, there's some connection to, order there. Again, it's very asymmetric, but um, and they're not, I think like modern people would appreciate it more if um, the yeah, like devotion was like grounded in something else besides the fact that, Odysseus is just happens to be a really strong king. Um, but there's again, I think it's proto. That's kind of the word that comes to mind for thinking about a lot of the themes in the Odyssey to me is like these are prototypes of some virtues or principles that are maybe going to get refined later. And so, the idea of like the loyal servant is, um, it's complicated and it's not presented, with all the social justice nuances that we would, talk about. But there's something there and there's some like, maybe like little goodness or beauty inside the devotion of the servants to the master and they're figuring it out like I also don't read the Odyssey in a super didactic way like there are certain themes that are definitely emphasized clearly like Xenia and so on but like I also think there's just human like reflection and imagination here and um like noticing patterns in the social world and trying to make sense of them but like I treat a lot of the ideas in the story as kind of provisional, as like working themselves out. So yeah.
I appreciate it. Bren, you jumped off. You want to say something to that?
Yeah, I think I give the slaves a little bit more credit. And I think the role that they play, especially in contrast to the slaves that, you know, um, did break their loyalty. I think that going back to the kind of like the role of the king in making the healthy society, it's like good kings create loyalty and good followers are loyal to good kings. And I think I do think Homer's giving credit to the slaves for being discerning with who they're giving their loyalty to. And they're like, they can recognize the goodness of Odysseus, and that is what makes them loyal. And because they are loyal to good, they are good. And I think that's the kind of dynamic that they're creating between the leader and follower. Is like by being good, you get loyalty from good people. By being bad, you get loyalty from bad people. And both sides of that dynamic will suffer if you're bad, and both sides of that dynamic will succeed if you're good. And that we see that played out in the way that they're treated in the end versus the way that the slave girls are treated in the end.
Yeah, I think all this is very interesting. Going back to what we talked about last week, or last month where Eumaeus was referred to in the first person a lot. Like like
Mhm.
Homer was speaking directly to him and kind of the way that it feels like he's elevated. I thought it was interesting that it feels like, to draw a modern parallel, like the average Joe who gets drafted into the Avengers or something. It's like it seems to me that there's some effort being made perhaps to show Eumaeus as winning in this contest, having an active role, not just like, benevolence is going to fall to him because he was loyal, but he'll actually get to shine in the victory in some ways, and for the way that he behaved and the kind of the way he stayed strong throughout time. But John, jump in.
And yeah, we don't see this like depicted, but there is a line from Odysseus, I believe, where he promises Eumaeus and the cowherd like rewards for their loyalty. So he says like you'll have a wife and you'll have like a decent house close to mine, and you'll be prosperous. So I think that is consistent with Brendan's idea that like the king is not just like doesn't just exercise arbitrary power, but like creates prosperity that could, be shared with his followers.
And he said you will be like brothers to
Yeah, Telemachus, yeah.
Telemachus. Yeah, that was a big thing to say that.
Marcus, you want to jump in at the one. I'm sorry we got away from your comment. Please bring us back.
No, no, I have another thing I'll bring back later, but on this thread, like what John was just saying, I think the economics of this is interesting to me, especially with the slaves. And if I did some more research, it might change my mind on how they were treated. But I have to imagine that they're all just living off his just like ambient wealth. And if that's the case, then all the slaves are also, they're living in his house, they're eating his food, they're drinking his wine. They're doing the exact same thing as the suitors are. Just sort of living off the wealth of this man. So treating them the same as the suitors in that sense, like, sort of makes sense.
What did you want to bring us back to, Marcus?
Uh, um, about the bow. Just like a straight thought of it's very like Thor's hammer, right? It's very like only the one true Thor can wield this weapon. But I wanted to tie that into like identity and in the various ways like that we know who people are in this. And in these couple books, like we get a lot of revelations that this is Odysseus mainly through like secret knowledge, right? It's shared memories or shared um knowing of things. And I think like in this time period, like sharing memories together is like how you define a person. I think that like that really gets tied up too with with the lineages that keep coming up. Like people want to be remembered in history, and the only way to do that is to like have done memorable things and have done honorable things that like were able to make it into a story. So like the Odysseus that lives down to us today is, the one from these stories. It's like the knowledge that has lived on, that is his identity.
Yeah, I think that identity is very much set up in these books. So like, what does it mean to be Odysseus? What is the identity that he has, and how do we know over and over? It gets to the point we haven't spoken a lot about Penelope, kind of how she discovers and how she goes through this, and different people's different levels of trust in the identity, and kind of what brings it back in. So, Marcus, while you're unmuted, do you want to just recap quickly, like how Penelope tests the identity of Odysseus?
Yeah, she gives him a trick as well. I think she makes an offhand comment for the slaves to like go move the bed. And he goes, wait, who's moving the bed? Like no one can move the bed. So she sets it up very much in like the way like a CIA agent might like trying to test the knowledge of like a double agent or something. Um, she really sets him up to, if he had said nothing there, she would have been like, oh, this is he doesn't know, he's a faker. But yeah, they say that only the two of them and like one of the first slaves that she had, like only the three of them are the only three people who know this piece of knowledge. And like having that key, like having that shared memory, like like not just identifies, but sort of like defines themselves to each other. Like these are the things that, we share.
Yeah, absolutely. What did folks think about that scene? I'm curious. We had had a spirited discussion last month about whether Penelope knew at any point? Like, did she recognize that this was Odysseus? Like, does she need this to fully recognize him? What is Homer trying to tell us something about Penelope? Like, what do people make of this? I mean, essentially chapter. The book 23 is mostly focused on this kind of revelation and setting up the story. What do people make of that?
I'm still in the camp that like she knew something weird was going on, but she didn't really know it was him. Although like she does set him up with the bow, right? Like when they're all fighting over whether or not he should be allowed to try the bow, like she does say, "Oh, well, let him do it," because I think she wants to see. Um, but yeah, I think she really truly she doesn't know for sure until that point.
Yeah, I would agree. And then I think that one passage that we already mentioned when she refers to Helen, being tricked by the gods, I think she's kind of resisting to fully open her eyes and her mind and her heart so that she wouldn't be, either disappointed or, done something that, she would regret. So.
Really?
Beyond just this question, I get a sense in the larger arc of the story that I wonder if the writers are wanting to portray that Penelope is a worthy mate for Odysseus and like showing her power, her intelligence, her strength, her wits and smartness, and like that there's been several things that have revealed who she is, and that was a big one of them.
I tend to agree, Julie. I think that part of the reason for this is to just show that Penelope is his kind of equal in terms of her deceptiveness and intelligence and a number of
Yeah.
kind of like you said, like worthy of him, if you will. They're not equals. The power dynamics not equal, but the minds in some ways are equal in the sharing of stories. And but I do have one part that I'm not that I struggle with is it says that Athena puts the idea into her mind for the bow contest, like at the beginning. So
Right.
she's not really given full credit for it. The gods are kind of like putting it in her mind. And then when Amphimedon is in the underworld, he relates the story to Agamemnon, and he said that it was Odysseus's idea. That Odysseus told her to go do this and set it up. In the same story, Amphimedon is going on and on about, you know, about everything that's happened about Penelope and how smart she is, and goes into detail about how she tricked them so effortlessly for 3 years. She had this ruse. You're like, how long? Like, you think like after a few months they'd catch on that the thing's not getting bigger, but it literally takes someone telling them that it's that this is happening before they're concerned, which I still find a little silly or interesting. And then Agamemnon, I think it is, makes a whole point about like, oh, she's so brilliant, we're really gonna tell stories of her forever. And you almost get the sense of like she's one of the like clear protagonists of the story. In some ways, she's like a main character but a secondary character at the same time to me. And so I find so all that is to say, Julie, I agree in general that it seems like this is a device in part to show how smart she is, and that she can pay attention to the gods of Trickhelon, to Marx's point, or that she can you know has ways of recognition and other things the way that other people do, and she never quite gets the full credit. Like it never kind of comes home all the way, and maybe there's some ambiguity left. But John, what do you have to say about it?
Yeah, I think I have a reading about this, which again I don't know, but I think the ambiguity may be deliberate, and I think the simple theme um, might be something like, it's good that Penelope is so capable, but it's not a good thing that she needs to be so capable. Um, so I think I think the gender theme is like, Penelope is kind of stepping into like a masculine role at times. And like that's needed because of her dire situation, but at the same time, it represents like a warping of the usual order. Like there are, unusual demands upon her, and so she has to embody those characteristics. And I think, um, like I guess I think, yeah, it's almost like you wouldn't want to go too far. Um, I think, I don't know, just kind of a random, parallel, but like Lady Macbeth or something, as like a character who is supposed to represent, like the masculine ambition, getting too fierce and accelerating too much inside a woman. Um, so I think there's like yeah, like maybe an ambivalence in the story, where she's praiseworthy, but she's also stepping into a role that properly belongs to Odysseus or Telemachus.
I think you're Julie, please go ahead.
I just wanted to invite Stephanie in if you're there, and I'm just curious what you're thinking about any of this or all of this. I just would be interested in hearing your voice and your thoughts.
Sorry. I think maybe you're asking me that because you were seeing my face during the slave discussion. I think that and I understand the nuance of the discussion, um, and that we're talking about, something fictional, and also something that exists outside of our own culture and that is informed by cultural practices that may appear so distant to us that we don't have the right frame of reference for it. But, and I don't know if everyone on the call is in the United States, but in the United States, we do have a fairly recent frame of reference for it, right? And I think that any story has to be assessed from the perspective of what motivations the storyteller has. And particularly a story like the Odyssey that seems to be in some ways a vehicle for conveying what cultural practices should be favored or not favored, right? I think you have to take it from the perspective that the most of the people experiencing the Odyssey as it was meant to be experienced as, an oral telling, the people coming up with the story, they were more likely than not to not be slaves, right? And any culture that has enslavement as an aspect of its society inherently has an interest in convincing the people who are enslaved that being good, docile slaves is in their best interest for some reason, right? So when I see that aspect of the story where these slaves who are being loyal are being favored, I I can't divorce it from the fact that slavery is abhorrent, and I can't look at it as anything other than it's propaganda to convince enslaved people that they should continue being good, loyal slaves. And there are things like that in American culture, right? Because you still hear now in some places in the South where they say things like the slaves were better off when they were slaves, right? Um, so to me, it just seems like propaganda. Um, and I'm not saying that anyone that was talking about those things was defending slavery or anything like that. I understand the nuance of the discussion that was being had, but I just can't see it as anything else other than that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, and I think I'm curious whether I've been trying to page through another book about the time of the Odysseus, the time of the Odyssey, where they go back in like the economic and social and context of the time to like give me more of that grounding of like what would people have thought of. And one of the things that I've come away with a little bit is that it's not clear to me that they thought slavery was a big deal at all. For most of history, like 40% of people were enslaved. Like almost every, like we think of, I think it's particularly in the United States, we think of slavery as, people brought over from another continent against their will. But that happened over and over and over. Like slavery was the most common thing in the world. Like I'm not sure that Homer, I think they might have been a little bit fish in water there of like not even trying to convince the slaves that they're better off in a certain way as like be a good slave and this allows us to hold on to our power. Like maybe, and or it could also just be like I'm not sure they even thought slavery was like a big deal. Like I think they thought of slavery as like that's just the way the world works. And so it's
There
one
have
of those
as
things you can't really
as
divorce
for
how
as
we how they live.
sorry, I'm not trying to talk over you, but I get what you're saying. However, for every society that had slave revolts, and every society that had slaves had people that were abolitionists. So even in a society where a particular practice exists and is widely accepted by the vast majority of people, there were always humans who were like, this isn't right for whatever reason. And I guarantee you that the slaves, particularly in that society where if you were enslaved, it's because somebody came and killed your family and took you and said, now you're going to live with me, right? It's not, um, I guarantee you those people were not super thrilled to be slaves. So, so that's just what was going on in my mind is, the victors write the stories. The dominant people in society are the ones that do the writing and decide what social mores are going to be dominant. And so to me, when we have a story about a slave being loyal to his master, the subtext to that is always going to be the person telling the story has an interest in not as an individual, but as like a cultural practice, right? In the same way that the whole story is about Xenia and how if you practice good Xenia, you will get a good result, right? These are the cultural practices that the story is endorsing. So of course, it's going to reward a loyal slave and punish a disloyal slave, right? Because it's just propaganda. But I understand that is, I don't know what the right word would be, modern centric way of looking at it, right?
Well, I mean, I do think that's part of these four books. What makes them interesting is that it's really hard to read them through a modern eye and not pick up on the brutality or pick up on these other things or pick up on the propaganda or whatever the angle might be. And I think it's why there's so many different interpretations of this part and why there is so much ambiguity in Penelope in particular of like how is Penelope treated, how is she thought of. At one point she says in here that she is the prize, and when she's setting up the book, it's like, I'm the prize, I'm why you're all here. And then when what's his name, Eurytus is pleading for his life, he goes, but now the one responsible is dead, Antinous. It was all his idea. He did not even really want your wife, but had another plan, which Zeus has foiled, to lie in ambush for your son and kill him, and then seize the throne and rule in Ithaca. And it kind of like it builds up Penelope as that she's this great person and she's this prize worth having. And there's also the subtext of like, well, the way that things are actually done in the world are, well, if I marry her, then I get her wealth, and she's not really what I'm interested in. And so it's very hard to put yourself in the seat of somebody from 800 BC, and this is the first time it's been written down is 800 something BC, let alone all how it's been transmitted orally. And like in some ways it feels like a fool's errand to be like, what was Homer's intent with this? Like Homer wasn't even one person. And so just more just like interesting to surface what comes to mind as you read these stories and the ambiguity inherent in all of it.
Well, just to be clear, I'm not saying that if Homer even was a person named Homer, right? Like,
Of course.
I'm not saying if there was a person named Homer that wrote the story down, I'm not saying that he was like, I better get those slaves to think that it's good to be a good slave. I'm saying that those ideas get embedded, and the stories that survive in a certain society are the stories that enforce that society's, like the dominant popular part of the society's social mores, right? And that tends to be, the upper class. And this is a story about a bunch of upper class people going to fight a war, right? Like, so that's all I'm saying. And
Well said.
I actually really thought one thing that I thought was really interesting is in particular reading Emily Wilson's translation was that she decided to confront these issues outright. And in other translations of the Odyssey, you get euphemisms for what these characters actually are, right? And so I thought that was really cool that she made the editorial decision to say, no, these people weren't here voluntarily. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Emily Wilson has a new book out, if I'm not wrong, that is about kind of like memoirs of about how she how she translated this book, Crossing the Wine Dark Sea: Journeys Through Ancient Literature. Will be published June 4th. Well, I guess yeah, last week. And UK in September, about kind of how she made some of these decisions and why she did what she did, and like how the challenges of translating these things. So a good call out there about just the process and how difficult it is, and a timely book to read on it. Before we wrap up, we have just a few minutes. Thank you, Stephanie, for jumping in. I'm so glad you could make it after the Catherine project. Oh, John, did you have something you wanted to add real quick?
Yeah, I just um I guess actually I just wanted to cite the ending of the story in response. I thought
Please,
just
please.
maybe this, I think helps um, um, contextualize, yeah, the question of like whether the story is just straight up, glorifying Odysseus or not. Um, like I said, I just thought it was interesting that it ends with Odysseus, like nearly acting on his worst impulses to continue fighting, um, even as like Athena is basically telling him like it's time to stop. And he's physically going to continue the battle, and Zeus has to intervene with a thunderbolt to stop him. And then Athena speaks to him and says, Odysseus, like basically like stop being an idiot. She says, like, you are adaptable, you always find solutions, stop this war. Um, so the end note of the story is like Odysseus, kind of backsliding into primitive aggression and then being called to his higher self. So I don't think it comes across as like Odysseus can just do anything he wants because he's the king. Like he's still held accountable. He's still held to higher standards, and he's asked to think about the greater good in that moment.
Yeah, great contribution.
I think there's also a comment there about like the ineffectiveness of blood feuds. It's like, okay, both sides get a turn, and then you have to stop because it's really destructive to do this forever, which is like a relevant cultural comment for that type of society.
100%. Second.
That's where the story ends up, right? Because Athena develops, was it Athena develops the court system to end the blood feud with what is it, Atreus family or
Yeah, exactly that family. Orestes for kind of has the Furies chasing after him after avenging Agamemnon's death, and exactly it's Athena. It gets in exactly that. Stephanie, great contribution of develops a court system to stop exactly that type of thing. Oh, and here's a message from Trey. Thanks, Trey. This is great. I don't, I'm going to come back to this here, but the last thing I want, maybe I'll read it while I throw out a question. I wanted to ask folks, there were a couple times that Telemachus got mentioned at the beginning, and Trey, you had kicked us off on that, and then Marcus, you added that, there was something in there. So if anybody wanted to add anything about Telemachus, I wanted to just open that up before we wrap up here for the night.
What about giving us a preview of what you think we'll discuss next week? What do you think what do you think we will care about next week?
And I also want to ask a request, like when we watch the movie, if we get to watch the movie before our next meeting, like suggestions of what like lenses to view it through. I'm curious what, how people are going to watch the movie. The obvious one is like, how does the movie compare with the book? But that kind of just seems like too.
For me, it's how does the movie compare to the book, but it's also what moral frame does Christopher Nolan apply either implicitly or explicitly, and how does that differ from the book? More than just like this thing happened or didn't happen, or this made the cut or didn't make the cut. He will either emphasize or de-emphasize various things that we've all said were meant to convey specific moral lessons. And I'm curious, even to Stephanie's point, like there's a very clear stance here that like slavery is a normal part of society, and that's being kind of reinforced from Homer's perspective. And like if Christopher Nolan, I don't think he will, but for some reason, like every time a slave showed up, they were like, slavery is the worst. That would really stand out, right? Because it would be like a very overt injection of modern morals. But I think there will be versions of that. And I'll be really curious to see like interpretations of what he's saying with those changes.
And I would just jump on that and add, I really appreciate that, Brennan. Like, what is Christopher Nolan's message through this movie, or his intent, or what is he trying to convey to us as the director? So I appreciate that.
I would take a stab at that. All his movies are very, very tied up in like memory and identity and stories. Like he's a filmmaker like at heart, right? So I think we'll get a lot of play on like those themes specifically, if not the um this is a story that people over generations have adapted to their own time. So I think we'll get a bit of that as well.
Yeah, he's like famous to like a comical level for being like he only does stories about a dad trying to get back to his kids. Uh, like that's the joke about Christopher Nolan, and I think he's like, maybe I wasn't being subtle enough, guys. I was doing the Odyssey, and so I do think that it'll be fun to kind of watch it through that lens.
Stephanie, do you want to add something there?
No, I am planning to see it, but I'm curious how they're gonna do the massacring of everybody at the end. I'm really curious how they're because like it's so foreign to a modern audience, like the justification for it. Um, so I'm interested to see how that will be handled.
Yeah, so on the movie part, I scheduled it after the movie because I just thought it'd be interesting fodder, right? I just thought it'd be like, oh, what did you think? And what was the same? What was different? What jumped out? I think that one of my favorite parts about hosting these now 7 sessions has been like everyone kind of sees something a little different. They read it a little different, something else, stands out. Like I, I view Odysseus as a bit of like a anti-hero. Like I don't really like Odysseus for the most part, and I think that some of the ambiguity, like if I was gonna make a movie about him, I don't portray him as just an outright hero. Like I'm curious what Christopher Nolan's gonna do there. Like I think Telemachus shows like real growth in the first parts of the book, and it's like, oh, this is a cool coming of age story, and then it kind of disappoints me at the end where he's like still just like a whiny little kid who's like Odysseus asked him his opinion on something. He's like, I gotta defer to you, man. Like, aren't you famous for being like the smart one? Like, don't put this on me. And he, snaps back at his mom in the same way that he has like over and over again. I'm like, oh, I'm kind of curious. Do they show Telemachus having a coming of age, or does he kind of end where he started? And so there's the like, how are they going to portray this scene or this thing? To Stephanie's point, and I'm also just like, how do they frame these characters? Like, what do they have to say about who these characters are and what's there? And I have been finding personally different interpretations and different reading different mythologies as we've gone through this as kind of side reading to prepare. Really interesting in pulling out different vignettes from the story. So I watched, and I think some people did The Return, the Ray Fiennes movie where he plays Odysseus. And I personally didn't care for that at all. And I thought it was beautifully done and I thought it was interesting. But to me, they changed the story to be a moralizing story about how war is bad. And that just personally isn't like my reading of the Odyssey. And it's perfectly fine. Like people adapt the Odyssey for all kinds of reasons. They change the story, they change elements. Like it's not like there's one true Odyssey and only one way to tell it. Like they changed some of what happens in what order, and they change some of the different characters and what motivates them. And I watched it and I was like, okay, I get it, director. You think war is bad and that there's like high cost to war and all those different things. And like, that's great. And it was still like a good movie, but I was like, that's not the Odyssey that like I read. That wasn't what jumped out at me. That's a very like personal taste, thing. But then you read the Penelope ad, by Margaret Atwood. I thought that was like brilliant. She doesn't change like a single element, but just deepens it and like tells different stories off of it and adds new context, but keeps herself confined to like what seems to be actually happening in the Odyssey, and is this really rich vein and modern telling of from like Penelope and the maid's perspective. And it like really makes you read the Odyssey differently. And so what I'm interested, the reason I go into all this detail is to say the reason I scheduled a recap was I wanted to have time, and we just spent an hour and a half on it to just talk about the last four books. Like, what happens to the olive tree and the bow, and like tie all these different, themes together a little bit and give people a chance to do what we've been doing. But what I'm really interested in is getting into the questions next time of like, why did this last so long? Is it more relatable to some people than others? Like, did you like it? Did you not like it? What are you motivated to read next? Like more of the big picture, you got to the end of the book, what did you think? It's books club style thing, as opposed to, breaking down the details of the four books. And so I would not say that the next session is meant to be like uh Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Like, what did we all think? Like, I don't think we'll start there. I think what we'll start with is, what'd you make of the book as a whole? Are you glad you read it? Many people were reading it for the first time. What did you really think? What were some of the broad themes and takeaways? And kind of the same way we did the introduction might be the best place to start. Like when we did the intro, we talked about like, why are you reading this book and what are we going to run into and how is this going to be done? We spent an hour on that. And so we're going to do that kind of just on the back end, and then we'll have the Christopher Nolan movie in our back pocket to go, okay, like what themes jumped out? What do we pick up on? Salute, Stephanie. And like what do we, you know, what did the Nolan movie do for us in either changing the reading, reinforcing the reading, or just being, a good or bad interpretation of the book that hopefully you really enjoyed reading the last 7 months, I think it was. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about. But I'm also very open to suggestions. Julie, I took down your note so that I'm ready for next week, so that we can start with why has this lasted so long, and what did people think, and get into that discussion. But if anybody has anything else here that they want to share, that you want me to be preparing for or thinking about, I'd be more than happy to do that.
I'm not sure if this is what you're looking for, but I'll just say one thing on the Nolan piece that, like, to me, I'm not going to be testing this film on, like, is it accurate to the source material? Like, I don't think this is like a scholarly tribute or like part of like a classics education. Like, this is a major Hollywood movie. And so I'll be grading it on like, does Nolan succeed in making the Odyssey relatable? And I'm really curious to see how he approaches that. I'm sure he's thinking a lot about that. Like he could just portray it as, exotic and adventurous and so on. But I suspect he's going to try to, relate it to um, modern concerns, the modern human condition in a way. And if he can do that like skillfully and artfully, where like I see like a plausible connection to the original story, like to me that would be like a passing grade.
Brandon, you came off when you started saying that.
I was going to say I would sail between monsters to get back to Anne Hathaway, so I already feel that this is a very relatable story.
And it took you 7 years to get off the
Man.
island with Charlize Theron.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, tough choices.
Stephanie, what were you gonna add?
I was going to say that I would give it a passing grade if it stuck to the source material and made it relevant, because I think the story is inherently unrelatable culturally for us. And so I think it would be very difficult to do the Odyssey and stay true to the source material and make it a movie like a big Hollywood blockbuster that everybody wants to see and everyone watches and is like, oh, that was really cool. I think the story is just too bizarre. Everything that happens in it is just too weird. But we'll see, I guess.
Unlike our country, we're USers.
What was that?
Unlike our country, for people from the US being bizarre and weird. Just gotta say.
Yeah, I want to be entertained. I want to watch it, be like, man, that was cool, that was fun. Like part of the thing that I like about the Odyssey is like I find it just wildly entertaining and interesting, and I love all the little Easter eggs that I feel like are in the book, because every time I reread it and prepare for these, like I learn something new and new symbolism comes through. Like I'm just really excited to see what he does with it. And I get from my mom, I do not like violent stuff. Like I won't watch movies with my wife that aren't like 30-minute comedies or something. So I'm like, nope, there's enough bad stuff in the world. I can't watch Grey's Anatomy. Like she loves that show. Could never watch. Too dark for me. Too much blood. So to give you a level of my comfort with violence. So I know I'm gonna have to toughen up a bit for the Nolan movie, but I hope that it's just wildly entertaining. And fun to watch and gets more people into the Odyssey, more people to come, to session 8 to talk. And maybe I will add that note. No, we don't have to answer now, but if anyone, I thought this was spectacular, and if anybody wanted to do like session 9 on afterwards, like in August or September or something, on the Penelope ad, it's very short and very easy to read. Like it took me. I mean, I think I sat down for 2 hours one afternoon and then, and like an hour the next day. It's like it's 193 pages, but kind of like big print and not super complicated. But I thought it was just awesome. And one of the things I thought was so great about it was that the way that it wove in all these details about the mythology and the story, and it's a very modern story. Okay, I already got 2 at least, and I'm pretty sure I can rope my mom and brother in, so that gives us a quorum. So we'll see so I'll get that posted, and would love to have participants from this come join. But it's just I think really really good and really really interesting, and I think we didn't get into as much in this session Penelope and like her version was we touched on it a little bit, but like I think if we do this, that will give us a ton of a lot more to talk about on that ground of like how does Penelope and the maids fit into all of this, and it really centers the women of the story, much more central, and so I'd be very curious to get people's perspective on that. So I will get to posting that, and we'll do another one. I don't want to leave you all. I'm not ready to go. Okay, there it is. Yeah, Stephanie's got it locked and loaded. And then we can, we'll do that, and then at the next one too, the I should say thank you for being with me for all of this and like just reading this big book and not necessarily the most accessible material. I really appreciate you all here. And if you want to do something again, like I love hosting these Interintellects. It's part of my little career I'm building of like just reaching out to people and talking about things I'm interested in and sharing and learning in a public setting. So if you want to do more of these or there's something you want to read next, like let me know. I'm happy to keep this rolling. Um, Oh, Stephanie wants to do the Iliad next. Okay. So thank you all for participating. I hope you have a great next like month and a half. Again, we're meeting toward the end of July, and that we're doing that so that there's time to go see the Nolan movie. So it'll be a little bit longer than normal until I see you again. But I'm very much looking forward to it, and I hope you'll turn out, and then we'll get this Penelope ad scheduled for the next one.
Thank you, Grant. We appreciate all your time and effort put into this.
Yeah,
Thanks.
definitely.
Very fun. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thanks all. Have a great night.
I'll see
Nice
y'all.
meeting
Appreciate
all
it.
of you. Take care.